As is the need and as is the want, we'll go on to the mailbag session. So the first one comes from Kite Pongan. I think I've pronounced your name right. Great videos with insight on the KordBot. Any word on the sequencer at this point? On the site it says firmware 5.0 is preparing for this summer. I just wonder what summer. In response to KordBot video I did earlier in the year, in March actually. So actually it's sort of pertinent that this question has come to the sort of front of the questions that I've got to answer at this point in time, because Brad, who is the CEO of Isla Instruments, was actually on Instagram not more than about 2 or 3 days ago, stating that his company, which is only a small company, Isla Instruments is a relatively small company. It's not the Rolands of this world. It's a small company trying to do niche products into the music industry. And he said basically that they've been having issues with the firmware for the KordBot. And really, basically, the whole thing was around the overhead that the firmware was having on the hardware. So what he basically said was it was difficult. He was finding it at the moment with the development staff that he's had. He has found it hard to extend the functionality of the KordBot because the firmware was putting too much overhead on the hardware itself, which meant that there was little headroom for some of the functions like the sequencer. And some of the other stuff that was happening. Basically, the little machine was running out of resources. And as he said, this is not due to the fact that the KordBot is under-specified. Far from that. The KordBot is a very over-specified piece of kit. It was that the firmware was very inefficient. The first versions of the firmware were very inefficient. And the code was being effectively executed in an inefficient way. So basically what he's done is he's recently gone and recruited a brand new embedded developer, and what they mean by embedded developer is basically that's where the developer develops code to basically be installed on a piece of hardware. So not like a computer where you load a program. An embedded developer effectively burn the code onto the machine, and that's the code that the machine runs every single time it boots up. And this developer has been set the task of effectively removing the inefficiencies in the firmware. And you know, if you believe what Brad said, and he's always been fairly open and honest with the sort of community on Instagram and on his various social media feeds, that the KordBot is now running like a train because they've made a lot of fundamental changes to the way that the firmware is being executed by the hardware, which will now allow him to add the additional features that he's always promised that he's going to add to the platform. And what he said is he expects that to happen first quarter 2020, subject to the normal caveats of bugs and other unforeseen delays. But he's targeting sort of March, April time to actually release another version of the firmware with this brand new recoded operating system for the KordBot. And what he said is basically they've recoded all the base features, and now they're starting to port from the old code base to the new code base the higher level functions such as the arpeggiator and that sort of stuff. So that all now needs to be ported across onto the new operating system. And having worked in this industry for some time, I've seen it done very, very quickly because it's all worked, and I've seen it done very, very slowly because everything has to be refactored. So I can really quite feel Brad's pain at this point in time. But hopefully that answers your question, fortuitous in timing that it may be. The next one from Gerald Havina, and he says, funny, similar story here. I also recently started using the KordBot properly, mainly to help me testing chord progressions and fiddling with composing using the Schmitter and diatone sequencers. And now I have properly hooked it up and it's a proper place. I'm starting to use it quite a lot. Again, due to the same video, I had two questions on the same video, and I thought I might as well just get them out of the way. Well, I've got to be honest, I hope you're still using the KordBot. Sadly, because of time issues I've had over the last year, the KordBot is in the studio. It's sitting, actually, I've got a drawer, it's sitting in a drawer at the moment, and although I was using it quite a lot earlier on in the year, I found that at the moment I'm just not using it an awful lot, but that's mainly due to my time constraints about everything that's going on in my life. Because I've also found that I've had a big creativity fall off. I've sat and tried to do things, and really the creativity is not streaming at the moment. So I hope you're still using it. I still think the KordBot is a cracking machine. It definitely has place in my studio. And again, new year, more time, I should be able to actually have far more fun with that. And also see the previous answer in this one about the comments from the owner of Isla Instruments about the new firmware and when that should be due. So, next one. Patrick Richardson writes, wow! ZEN-Core allows us to regurgitate all the Phantom patches. Phantom patches. It'll be early 2000s all over again. Roland is still basing their business on reinventing their laurels. So, it's a refresh or take on Roppler tech. Looking at the manual for the MC101 offering ZEN-Core, you can't modify any parameters at the oscillator wave source, such as pulse width, oscillation sync, wavetable, index, IDX, etc. And the only basic controls are filters, envelopes, etc. I see Soundless supplement to the manual has literally thousands of tones to throw through the filter envelope. Vibrato, FX, however, unless they come up with a software editor for the MC101, it makes it easy to personalize. I imagine a lot of the MC101 music won't get far from factory presets, and people will find it easier to use custom wave clips with the clip looper. This was in response to a video I did at mid-October, actually. God, time flies. Which was, what the hell is ZEN-Core? Now, I've said that ZEN-Core effectively, at its heart, is a PCM engine. And then on top of that, they've then allowed you to sort of change certain elements of the soundscape using the PCM, using the machine that you're on. Now, not all machines do it in the same way, but at the heart, the ZEN-Core engine is the ZEN-Core engine. And what's really interesting is that if you're old enough to remember the D50 launch, many moons ago, and I am just about old enough to remember the D50 launch, virtually every pop record that was in the top 40 for the next, well, you know, for a certain sort of genre of music, if you like, for the next 2 or 3 years, was basically using stock D50 sounds. You know, as I've said before on the channel, I mean, Enya did an entire album that just basically was the D50. Michael Jackson's bass lines on Bad all came from the D50. Yeah, there was lots of D50 stuff that was basically not even altered before it was put onto a track. And I suspect that you will be right with the MC101, because the MC101 and the MC707 is aimed at stock sounds. The sort of whole ethos is these stock sounds that you sort of splice together to create something. And again, I think, you know, anybody using these instruments to create music over the next couple of years will probably be stuck with the stock sounds. Now, one of the things I do know is that both these instruments have this looper function, which is referred to in the question, where you can basically record your own tone or sample into the machine as a WAV file, and then you can manipulate that WAV file in the machine itself. But it'd be interesting to see whether Roland actually expands the tone library and how you get additional tones into the machine from the stock sound library. As you know, Patrick says, you know, it comes with thousands. I think there's 3,000, if memory serves me, stock tones on these devices before you start adding anything of your own. But one of the things I have noted from a lot of the reviews that have been done on this this platform is they seem to suggest that the whole looper and sampling function of the unit is not as good as made out to be. There are definitely room for improvement on these areas, and they're basically saying they're not as good as the contemporaries on the market, aka the Akai MPC range. So if you're looking for that functionality, what a lot of people who've reviewed this thing, and I haven't reviewed it, so I'm going by what other people have said, you know, and that's the functionality you want. You might want to consider another machine until Roland issue a firmware. It will be interesting to see how they're going to expand the basic tone range, providing using the ZEN-Core engine. That will be very interesting how Roland actually tackle this whole area. Personally, I've ordered an SP24 from Isla. Because I used to have a friend who had an SP1200 and I really liked his SP1200, but even back then an SP1200s were extortionately expensive on the second-hand market, and now they really are horrendously expensive on the second-hand market to get a good SP1200 that works. But the SP24 is holding that heritage, and it's directly aimed at this sort of clip looper type market. So, and I was sort of looking at this, and I ordered this a long time before Roland announced the 707. But I think, I mean, I will find out when it arrives, because it should actually theoretically arrive in the new year. But I think the SP24 will probably trounce this. The other thing I've noticed on the Roland website recently is that for all the gear that was launched in that sort of September-October timeframe this year, that's 2019, all of it seems to have had at least one service patch upgrade. So here we are a month or so later. There's been at least one service patch upgrade for every piece of equipment by the looks of it. So that probably means that somewhere down the line the testing hasn't gone well for them to have to rush out patches so soon. On the flip side of that, of course, you know, we had the same with the System 8, but the reason why the System 8 patch came out so quickly is because that was the Juno 106 sounds that they were putting into position 3 that didn't ship with the original base firmware, because Roland didn't have time to get it in time. So I think what this is showing us is that I think things are coming to market before they have been fully tested. They're being rushed to market, I think, is sort of kind of where I'm coming from. But we shall see. Last one from my good friend Bruce. These procedural steps is why I collect floppy disks for my Korg T1. I do admire and look forward to using Soft Synths modules with keyboard controllers. However, the maintenance of some equipment for independent start and record is great benefit to me. This was in response to a mailbag I did way back in March 2018. And I have to kind of agree with you. Obviously, those who watch the channel a lot will know I use a lot of hardware. I have a lot of hardware. And as much as the industry moves towards soft synths and computer-based production, I sort of will resist, and I will carry on resisting. For me, the feeling of the instrument is far more important than the being able to do production while I'm jetting around the world. That's kind of not where I am, and also creating music in a box for me doesn't have the same appeal as playing a keyboard with little pinkies does. So I think I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. I think soft synths and keyboard controllers have their place. A friend of mine who plays in a band, he's the drummer, and actually he does all of his recording using Superior Drummer and a very cheap electronic drum kit for when they're actually in the studio, because A, it doesn't make a hell of a din, you don't have to mic it up because it's all electronic, and B, when you're moving it in and out of a studio, there's not a lot to move, whereas if you're moving a full drum kit in and out of a studio, there's a lot to move, there's a lot to mic up, you've got to get the mic in right, whereas Superior Drummer for him works much better in that particular instance. Out on the road he plays a proper set of drums, and he plays them very loudly as well. But so there is a time and a place for this sort of stuff, but I don't think the world is ever going to give up on lovely keyboards like the ones that sit behind me. If you liked the content of the video you've just seen, please give it a thumbs up. It just helps the YouTube algorithm with its selection process. If you want to leave a comment, please feel free to do that as well. Down below somewhere should be the ability to do that. I do try to respond to all the comments that are raised on the channel. Sometimes it takes me a few weeks because of what I'm doing, and I'm getting more and more comments and questions raised on the channel, so it just takes sometimes a little bit of time to do a bit of research. If you want to be notified when I put more rants, mailbags and videos about this sort of legacy tech and even modern tech on the channel, hit the subscribe button, hit that bell icon, and you'll be notified by YouTube when stuff happens. I try to publish at least 2 times a week, sometimes more, sometimes less. Until next time, bye bye.